Hello and welcome to a Glastonbury romance. Oh, I like this halo effect we've got going on here. Well, let's begin, shall we? The lonely meadows and orchards of this particular hillside, and especially certain bare patches of common land, without hedge, or railing, or furrow, or crop, or bush, or tree, had long rendered Chalice Hill one of Cordelia's favorite refuges. These had been her escape years before her father inherited the rector of Northwold's money. Of late, since the local chatter about their buying Chalice House, she had rather tended to avoid the place and to select others. Tonight, however, she felt that nothing but Chalice Hill would ease her mind. She had fancied that she knew the spot so well that she would attain with ease a certain bare expanse of grass that she held in her thoughts. But she had not allowed, as we seldom do allow, for the psychic pressure of the darkness itself, like a living entity, surrounded her. This invasion of the bewildered sense of a day-dweller by the enfolding presence of night is a unique phenomenon in human experience. However frequently it may have been felt, it always returns with a shock of disturbing surprise. The darkness becomes a polymorphous amorist, irresistible, not to be stayed. We beat it back with blinded sight, paralyzed touch, confusing hearing. But there is nothing of us that does not invade. When it is a woman who is in its grasp, it seems to arouse something in the feminine nature corresponding to itself, so that the recessive mystery of darkness in this woman, that underground tide of the old ancestral chaos that ebbs and flows at the bottom of her being, rushes forth to meet this primal sister, this twin daughter of the aboriginal abyss, whose incestuous embrace is all about her. Cordelia seemed unable to escape from this apple orchards on Chalice Hill. She was perfectly familiar with these in the daylight, and had often lightly and quickly clambered over the low walls and surround them. But tonight they seemed to extend like an enchanted forest. Insula Avalania! She was certainly wrestling with the soil, and with the growths of a soil that were more soaked in legends than any other hillside in Wessex. Legend seemed to thicken around her as she struggled blindly on between these budding apple trees. The fresh spring grass at the feet of these trees seemed in the darkness to be growing out of an earth that yielded to each step she took, an earth that was porous with mystery, an earth that was descending into supernatural dimensions where it had its unrealizable roots. How soft her touch, as she stretched out her arms and her bare hands, were the branches and the trunks of these apple trees. Would she never escape into the high, bare uplands? These apple trunks that she encountered seemed to grow thicker around her as she struggled up the grassy slope. They seemed to respond to her groping hands with a magnetic effluence of dark, rich, inscrutable vitality. They were like a sisterhood of invisible beings about her, full of sympathy with her feelings, impeding her progress with their mute conspiracy of understanding. Her brain was whirling with wild imaginings. Tears were now pouring down her cheeks. Not unhappy tears, but sweet, relieving, abandoning, delicious tears. She wanted to free herself from these sister arms, but the darkness itself was weakening her resistance to them with its own sister passion, passion older than the world. The master thought that drove her on was the thought of the unhappiness of her lover. What is it? What is it? Her brain kept on repeating. He is unhappy, and I know not what it is. I thought I knew him through and through, but oh, I know not what it is. Cordelia had almost reached the point of feeling as if she had become enchanted, or, in a more realistic sense, as if she had gone crazy and were going round and round in a circle instead of ascending, when she suddenly found herself on the top of the hill and in an open ground. Not only was she now in a bare field, but she now knew exactly where she was. She was near the place where a footpath over the other side of Chalice Hill led to the lane where the two giant oaks grew. Mr. Evans had talked to her many times about these oaks. He, of course, associated them with the Druids. But Cordelia had heard quite a different story about her father's new secretary, who would have informed her that they had been planted to mark the spot where the Vikings had landed. Mr. Geard's daughter now became aware that some large and mysterious release had come to her vexed spirit. There came a change in the weather, too, as she made her way across Stones Down and approached the hamlet of Wick. She felt at once as she swung along, walking so fast and free, sometimes with her hands tightly clenched and sometimes with her fingers so loosely extended that he trailed amid the chilly and gorgeous umbrageousness of both sides of the low lane. Cold gusts of wind she felt rising. She felt them blowing, not regularly, but intermittently. They blew over Wick Hollow, over Bulwark's Lane, over Maidencroft Lane, and whenever they reached their body, they swirled around as if they had been washing her, as if they had washed her, or laved her, or exercised her. Intermittent and erratic as they were, and though they veered a little according to the lay of the land, they came on the whole from the northwest. From the Bristol Channel they came, and from further away than that. They came from Mr. Evans's native country, from the native country of her own ancestors. They came, like those strange stones of Stonehenge, from South Wales. Cordelia reached the nearest of her great oaks, whether Viking or Druid, in what seemed to her so short a time that she felt as if she had been spirited there in the teeth of these western gusts. She came upon the oaks from the top of the eastern hedge bank, for she had come, on her wild approach, recklessly across the country. Here on the top of this hedge bank she rested, clutching a sweet-scented hazel branch with one hand and a bitter-scented elder branch with the other. The wind rose about her as she stood there in wilder and wilder gusts. And then Cordelia, gazing directly into the wide, flung branches of the biggest of the two giant trees, was aware of something else upon the wind. Those enormous branches seemed to have begun an orchestral monotone, composed of the notes of many instruments gathered up into one. It was a cumulative and rusting sigh that came to the woman's ears, as if a group of sorrowful Titans had lifted up their united voice in one lamentable dirge over the downfall of their race. It kept beginning afresh, this solemn moan upon the air, a moan which always mounted to a certain pitch and then sank into summer-times. Such were the vagancies of the wind. Between this pretentious requiem started afresh, there was a singular humming and droning in these huge branches, as if the tree wished to utter a private secret of its own to Cordelia's ears, before it recommenced its official chant. Yes, the peculiarity of intonation and the humming sound was that it shivered and shook with a special intonation for the woman standing upon the bank. And Cordelia knew well what that message was. The great tree was telling the hillside that there was rain upon the wind, but it was telling Cordelia something else. Then all was absolutely still. And in that stillness, a stillness like the terrible stillness of uttermost strain and travail, there came the first cry of birth, the fall of a single drop of rain. That first drop was followed by another, and then again by another. Cordelia did not hear them in the same place. One drop would fall upon the roadway beneath her, one upon a dead burdock leaf, one upon a faded hart's tongue fern of last year's growth. Then the sound of falling drops would be drowned in a reawakening of that orchestral dirge. Then the wind would die down over all the upland, and once more an absolute stillness would descend. And in the stillness again, only now in an increased number, the big raindrops would splash to earth, one falling upon a dead leaf, one upon a naked stone, one upon a knot of close-growth twigs, one upon Cordelia's bare forehead. Her feelings at that moment was that some deep psychic chain had been broken in her inmost being. Hola! Hola! She could not restrain herself from giving vent to a wild cry of exultant delight as the first bursting deluge followed these premonitory drops. She waited for a minute or two, with upturned head and closed eyes, letting the water stream upon her face. Then, slithering down the wet bank, she reached the lane, and without a glance in the direction of the oaks, which were now totally invisible, she began, with head bowed down and fingers tightening upon her jacket collar, to make her way back to the town. Only once on her way back did she pause and glance upward for the downpouring blackness. This was when she distinctly heard the drumming of an airplane somewhere above her head. That's Philip Crow, she thought to herself, traveling like the devil through the black rain. He's off to Wookey Hole. And that concludes that chapter. And we'll begin the next one presently. So that chapter was called Carbonek. This chapter now is Wookey Hole. The mayor of Glastonbury had finished his breakfast and was reading the Western Gazette. Mr. Timothy Wallop was an honest man. He had never deliberately cheated a fellow creature of a farthing. He was a self-controlled man. He had never, since the death of his father, Mr. Constantine Wallop, lost his temper with any living soul. To his father, now in his grave in the cemetery of the Wells Road, Mr. Wallop had been irritable on several occasions. But old Constantine's ways toward the end had been past all bearing. A saint would have cursed the old wretch. A philosopher would have done worse. An ordinary man would have murdered him. But Timothy had only been just perceptibly cross. Mr. Wallop had neither wife nor children. His servants were kept at such a respectable distance that they may be said to have been non-existent. They were the hands that kept his house clean and warm, and they brought him his moderate meals of reasonable hours. Had they been the ravens that fed Alicia, or the invisible attendants who waited upon the prince in the fairy stories, they could not have been more dehumanized. Mr. Timothy Wallop lived to himself. To say that because he was lonely he was unhappy would have been to utter the extreme opposite of the truth. Mr. Wallop was one of the happiest men in Somersetshire. He neither smoked, nor drank, nor whored. He never gave way, even in the solitary watches of the night, to the feverish pricks of sensual desire. As soon as his head touched the pillow, he fell asleep. Of what did Mayor Wallop dream? He never dreamed. Or if he did, he forgot his dream, so completely unawakening that for a man to say, "I dreamed like Mayor Wallop," would be tantamount to saying, "My sleep was dreamless." Of what did Mayor Wallop think as he walked down the house in Wells Road to his shop in High Street? He thought of what he saw. In truth, it was maybe said that, with the exception of Bert Cole, no one in Glastonbury regarded the panorama of things and persons with more absorbing interest than it did the mayor. Not a stick or a stone, not a bit of orange peel in any gutter, not a sparrow upon any roof, not a crack in any window, not any aspect of the weather, wet or fine, not any old face or any new face, not any familiar suit of clothes or any unexpected suit of clothes, not any dog or cat or canary or pigeon or horse or bicycle or motor car, not any new leaf on an old branch, not any old leaf on a new branch. But Timothy Wallop noted it, liked to see it there, and thought about it being there. The mayor was one of those rare beings who really like the world we all have been born into. More than that, much more than that. The mayor was obsessed with a trance-like absorption of interest by the appearance of our world exactly as it appeared. What worries some, disconcerts others, agitates others, saddens others, torments others, makes others feel responsibility, sympathy, shame, remorse, had no effect upon the duck's back of Mr. Wallop, beyond the peaceful titillation of surface interest. Below appearances, Mr. Wallop never went. Below the surfaces of appearances, he never went. If the unbearable crotchets of his father had been confined to the old man's thoughts, Mr. Wallop would never have been ruffled. People's thoughts were non-existent to the mayor of Glastonbury, and if there is a level of his possibility more non-existent than non-existence itself, such a level was filled for him by people's instincts, feelings, impulses, aspirations, intuitions. The servants in his house, as far as any interior personality was concerned, might have been labeled A, B, C, and the assistants to his shop, in the same sense, might have been named D, E, F. When B, shall we say, a female servant in a fit of hysterics, put on her cap back in front, Mr. Wallop was as interested as when, on his walk to his shop, he mildly observed that a well-known tabby cat's ear had been bitten off. When E, shall we say, a male shop assistant, appeared one morning tricked up for a funeral, Mr. Wallop enjoyed the same quiet stir as when on his walk down High Street he noticed that the black frost had killed all the petunias in old Mrs. Cole's window box. Mr. Wallop had once overheard one of his younger shop assistants, a young man in whose sleek black hair he had come to take a quiet interest, wondering what hair wash the lad patronized, refer to something called Nietzsche. From the context, Mr. Wallop gathered that Nietzsche could hardly be the name of a hair wash. It seemed rather to be some pious formula used by the young man, by which he threw off responsibility for having got some young woman into trouble. At this point, Mr. Wallop's interest ceased, just as it had ceased when the question arose as to how the tabby cat had lost its ear. Mr. Wallop had no quarrel with young men who had formulas for dodging responsibility, as long as they did their work in the shop. What he was conscious of was a certain puzzled contempt for anyone whose selfishness was so weak and shaky that it required a pious formula. Mr. Wallop needed no formula, pious or otherwise. The appearances of things were the nature of things, and all things as they presented themselves to his attention in his house, in the street, and in his shop, fed his mind with slow, agreeable, unruffled ponderings. Mr. Wallop was not greedy at his meals, though he frequently thought of his meals. And as I have hinted, he was totally devoid of specialized sensuality. No man, no woman, no child could ever have said, if they spoke the truth, that they caught the mayor of Glastonbury fixing upon them a lecherous eye. The truth seemed to be that the mayor was exactly like young Bert Cole. Bert and Mayor Wallop diffused the projection of their amorous propensities over the whole surface of the world, and their world was what they saw. Well, there we go. We got the mayor now going on. Excellent, excellent stuff there. Very Glastonbury romance. Well, until next time, I'll see you in Glastonbury. Cheers.